everyone. Today we're going to do a quick case walkthrough on Archform. This video will be mainly focused on the software as opposed to difficult treatment plan or staging. So I've chosen quite a simple case just so we can get through the steps pretty quick. So before I open the case in Archform, I'm gonna just check the scans in a 3D viewer. Usually I use 3Shape 3D viewer. But you feel free to use any 3D viewer that you have available. Normally here I will just double check the scans for any undercuts or artifacts or any other defects. So take a quick look around. So scans are good. Let's go ahead and launch the case in Archform. Archform will always launch on the last case that you had open. And just so everyone's aware, we're using Archform version 2.2.0. Okay, so click there in the middle. We're going to add our new patient. Let's call it test case. And we can just get our files. So upper, lower, I'll just say create patient. The scans will load in the occlusion that they were scanned in. So if you need to modify the bytes, it can be done in Mesh Mixer or here in the software itself. We'll just start to move the models. You can see that there's some yellow areas here on the scans. What's that? It's just highlighting that there's some merging between upper and lower scans. I normally go back to my 3Shape viewer and try to take a cross section. This for me helps quite a lot. And we can just measure how much those models are merging using the cross section. So just drop 2 points. You can see it's very minimal amounts. Over there it's like 0.1, less than 0.1 millimeters of merging. So that I think is very insignificant. It could just be that the patient has pretty strong occlusion and that's all it is. So if we measure another point, very, very minor merging. So I'll probably not adjust this byte, also considering that this looks more like a simple anterior alignment only case. So for that reason too, I'm not going to be adjusting the byte on this case. If I needed to, I would just highlight one of the models and perhaps there is a bug in Archform with that. Sometimes it shows more context when you lift the models. If that happens, you just undo until it looks normal again and then the bug will disappear. But if, for example, I did want to relieve all the collisions, I would just raise the byte up slightly until all the yellow was gone. That will just depend on the case that you're treating and exactly what's being done and your assessment of the byte. So let's highlight both models using the shift key. So once you select one, just hold on shift and then select the other model. Just going to make sure that our midlines are on. Obviously, we'll just double check that that matches up with what we're seeing in the photographs. The rest looks pretty good. We'll go to trim the models. Normally I do 3 plane cuts per model. So I click here, trim upper. I'll do from one side, then from the front, and finally from the other side. So I'm just trying to get that quite parallel to this green occlusal plane that we see. The base generates parallel to the plane, so it's important to keep that as parallel as possible, just so that we get very neat models and symmetric models as well. Now I'm just using the lasso tool to remove any excess material. Don't cut too short close to the back, otherwise sometimes the generated roots can pop out through the gum. Of course we don't want that. Then let's go to lower, click show planes again. just do our 3 plain cuts. So this time we can start in the front, right, left, and then go to our lasso tool, remove the plane there, trim lower. And just do the same, trim the back. Okay. Before clicking next, it's important to check both your models. Make sure that they look quite parallel, pretty short, even heights when looking from this plane. And that way we'll get very nicely trimmed models with nice bases. So just be cautious to move on to this point, because if you press next and have to come back for any reason, you will have lost all of your trimming and model orientation. So super important not to click next unless you're 100% sure. Now we can see the bases have generated, and the next thing to do will just be dropping a little dots on each tooth. It doesn't have to exactly be in the center. I have tested it before. I can read from pretty much anywhere, but I like to just keep it in the center just in case. Let's go for next. And now it's gonna find the margins, the tooth margins. Okay, and here it is. So we're gonna just go around and see if everything looks good. We're just looking for any areas where the line hasn't gone completely around the teeth. When you want to move to the next tooth, you just press enter on the keyboard, or you can click this done editing tooth over here, and then it will allow you to choose which tooth you want to work on just by clicking on the tooth. To move the lines on Archform, it's a little bit weird. You can see here it says curves tools, sculpt and smooth. So the sculpt is basically allowing you to drag the line with each mouse click. The smaller it is, you'll see sometimes it gets a little bit jagged when you do a lot of movements. So like if you look here, for example, if you try to fix this, it makes these peaks. So to overcome that, you have this smooth tool. So you can click it here and smooth like this. You can increase the size, probably it's a good idea. And then you can sculpt. So you have to do a kind of mix of dragging the line and then smoothing it. I found a good hack for this. It's just to add the shift key onto your mouse, and then because you can easily toggle between the two using shift key or by holding down the shift key. So if you program the shift into your mouse, then it's pretty easy to go between the two. Looks good. Going for the lower. Did a good job on the lower. I'll just press enter and we'll move on to the next, and it's going to start to generate the teeth. But once it's done, at least it's pretty accurate if we've set our lines quite well in the previous step. So over here it's showing the two numbers. This one is set in universal numbering. I'll just check that the computer caught everything. And now we'll just check the mesial distal points and the long axis of the tooth to see if we need to change anything, like here. I think we can give a little bit of a tip on there. The lateral, I think, as well. Just trying to find the long axis. Okay, so before we start aligning the teeth, we can just take a look at what we're seeing here. These green planes that you're saying are just for when we want to export the models, just showing you where it's going to make the cut. You can just click off anywhere on the screen and it'll disappear. But if you want to come back to it, you can just click on those yellow dots and move those as needed. Another thing you're going to notice here is the numbers on the teeth. This will show the aligner step number. So for each aligner, it will change the numbers. If you don't want them for any reason, there's no way to actually delete them from the tooth, but you can just drag them underneath the gum, as you see here, and then they won't be visible anymore. So you can just decide before you start what you would like to do with those. Then, as we saw when we first opened the models, we saw the yellow areas of merging. Here they're showing up as red and a couple of yellow. This is just to give you a better idea of how strong those contacts are. You may also see green, which would be like a bit of a smaller contact than the yellow one, but we've already assessed these contacts and we're happy with them. So we'll just align not moving posteriors and we'll get rid of the collisions here in the front. Let's start with the lower. So I like to only align from occlusal to start on the lower, just to get an idea about the kind of space we have available once we have addressed the crowding. Here I'm using the reduce space tool or add IPR tool, of course depending whether there's a space or a collision there. So if it is a positive value, it means that there is IPR. If it's a negative value, it means that there is a space. So just removing all of those, setting it to 0. So this is it from occlusal. After our very initial alignments, which I normally, as I mentioned, I do very quick from occlusal just to get an idea about the space that we have available and just be able to assess if we're doing too much buccal movements, too much expansion, proclination, something we can just assess from here. Once we have that initial alignment done, before I move on to changing any kind of root tips or intrusion extrusion, I like to go to the upper straight away and just do the same really quick alignment from the occlusal. So this is just to help us get this idea of how much space we have to work with. Right, so now we have kind of a pre-alignment. So that was just a very quick alignment from occlusal only, upper and lower, just to get an idea of what's happening. And now I will start to refine a bit more. So This is when I'll start to check from the buckle. Change root tips if needed. Of course, we never want to overdo it. Obviously, the less movement we do, the more predictable the treatment is going to be. So I try just to do only what's needed. Now just assessing our overjet looks quite uneven. So I'm just going to work on trying to even that out, and that should resolve that contact on the lateral. So I like to work with the collisions on, oops, sorry, just so I can see the occlusion without having to look at the lower model. Okay, I think that looks fine. Let's move on to leveling real quick. So we have this grid here. Let's go to the fronts. Let me turn off the collisions again. So let's just quickly talk about these 15 steps. So that's basically being caused by this rotation here. If we go to the settings, you can change the distance step size or rotation step size. Over here, you can input your parameters that you want to plan with, and then the steps will automatically generate based on those values that you input. Um, obviously, you can just see what works for you, what works for the case. Then once you have everything set, you can go ahead and add attachments. There is an option here for attachments rules where you can do auto attachments. I have tried it. I think I need to update it. I can show you what happens right now when I use the auto attachments. Oh wait, it's over here. So it does add them according to the parameters, just the size and shapes come out a bit weird, but There's no problem because we can just click on each individual attachment and then change the size and orientation. So it's actually handy to use the auto attachment function. So you can see here we're trying to support this rotation. Obviously, the direction that the bevel faces in will be your preference or your doctor's preference. So you can just assess that for yourself. In this particular case, I'm just having the bevel face towards the pushing side. So let's go edit attachments. It's pretty large attachment. I know we're extruding, I think, so, but just reduce the size. And this one, I think I just need to update the torque values, the positive and negative, and then it will look much better. I just needed to assess. This one is for extrusion as well, yes. So I'll just make it a bit smaller though. Okay, and those are the attachments. Then let's take a real quick look at the staging. So Archform may be a little bit different to the normal table that you may be used to seeing. It has only one sort of timeline for all the teeth combined. So it's a very simplified movements table, which is fine. Can definitely deal with this. So how I like to do it, some people may like to work backwards when they do the staging. On Archform, I find it easier to work forwards. So I try to set a goal more or less every 5 steps. This helps me personally control the movements a bit better. So I'm going to right click here and say insert upper and lower goals. I'm going to go to the first goal and I'm just going to relieve these interproximal collisions. I'm going to play through the steps. Just watch the movements, see what's happening. If I watch on these premolars during the treatment, you can see that what we're trying to do ultimately is just bring the distal in. But of course, trying to bring it in when we don't have space is not the most practical idea. So I like to just add some expansion. It's not real expansion because what you'll notice when we watch, oh, sorry, I'm clicking the wrong button. When we watch what's happening when we add expansion is that we're actually just changing the center of rotation of the tooth. So here you can see we're kind of maintaining the distal corner in its position and we're just rotating mesial out and opening a slight space there, which is what we want because we need that space to have our distal come in a bit later. So that looks pretty good for the first goal. Everything looks fine. Now we'll go to the upper. So I sort of do it in iterations. Go lower, then upper, then the next goal lower, next goal upper. And we'll just use a similar concept in the upper with these laterals, the mesial, especially on this side. So we want to just make sure that we're not bringing the mesial in yet until there's space. So actually, if you watch tooth number 2-1, it's just moving forward. The main goal is just to move forward. I don't know why it has this mesial distal movement. So I'll just speed up the forward movement in the initial goal, and that way we have it aligned already and we have enough space to bring the mesial corner of 2-2 in. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for in the staging. Let me push that one a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna add my next goals. So let's see. Let's go to the lower jaw first. Someone's breaking my rule of starting always on the lower. So we're just looking for any interproximal collisions and just looking how we can facilitate any movements. We have this more or less done in terms of staging. So I'm just going to check in the last few steps that there's no collisions. If there is, there's no harm in adding just one final goal. Here you can see we're getting a collision at 13. So actually going to add a goal there just to remove it. Just want to make sure there's no friction during the whole plan. Yeah, and that looks fine. So we're done with the staging. And then if we wanted to upload this case to the portal, we just click here, upload. So Archform actually has an online platform. It's called Archform Dashboard. So this is the platform here, dashboard.archform.co. Once the case is finished uploading here, it's going to show up on the dashboard in unprocessed. I'll just refresh. Normally you have to refresh quite often, and it will be this case here. And from here, you would be able to get this 3D shareable viewer to be able to send the plan to the doctor. Let's just wait. It still hasn't, yes, now it's uploaded. Now you see here where it says web viewer, so you can click there and then click to copy. And if we can just launch, you'll be able to see the case. And basically the dentist or you can send this link to your doctor and they will be able to check the plan and go through the models and toggle on and off, upper and lower. So it's quite a nice feature that Archform has, but only available from the dashboard. Going back to the case, if you want to export it, we'll just click here, export, and you'll have all your various options for export, like the orientation, if you want the vertical, horizontal, if you want the solid models or hollow, if you want a label. Then if you want this auto block outs, in this particular case, I wouldn't use it just because the crowns are pretty short and the models don't seem very retentive. So I probably wouldn't, but there are definitely circumstances where you could use that. And just click export when you're ready to go. And then it will just put them in a folder on your desktop. Actually, one quick thing to show you real quick, we have export functions here and you can choose between if you want them in OBJ format or STL format over here. So just make sure that's selected before you export them. And then there's also some other settings that we'll go through in more detail pretty soon.